Before everything fell apart, I thought I understood what loneliness meant. But nothing could have prepared me for the real betrayal that was about to unfold. One moment, I was just a forgotten old woman, clinging to my daily routines. The next, my entire world turned upside down, in ways I never could have imagined. Stick around, and don't forget to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Routine was the only thing holding me together. Every Monday, rain or shine, I walked 2 blocks to the little market on Main Street. Same time, same list. Bread, milk, a few apples, maybe a chocolate bar if I felt reckless. Spokane wasn't a big city, but at 73 years old, even its quiet streets felt too fast for me sometimes. I lived alone, had been, ever since Harold died 15 years ago and David moved away to chase a life of his own. I didn't blame him. Young people had their own dreams. Still, the house felt colder every year. Most days, the only voice I heard belonged to the radio playing old country songs in my kitchen. And every week, without fail, I bought a lottery ticket. Same numbers always. David's birthday, my wedding anniversary, and my mother's lucky charm numbers she used to swear by. It was just a habit, a thread tying me to the past. I never believed I'd win. Whoever does. That Monday didn't seem different at all. I tucked my scarf around my neck, pulled my worn shopping cart behind me, and braced myself against the brisk autumn wind. Leaves crunched under my feet as I made my way down the cracked sidewalk toward Granger's Market. Inside, the smell of overripe bananas and detergent filled the air. I moved slowly, choosing my items one by one. Bread, milk, apples, chocolate bar. I smiled faintly to myself, a small rebellion against my sugar ban. By the time I got in line, my legs ached from standing too long. The line stretched almost to the back of the store, a sea of tired faces and full carts. I leaned heavily on my cart for balance, feeling the familiar throb in my knees. It was then that I noticed the television bolted to the ceiling above the registers. The local news was wrapping up. The anchor, a young woman with too much blush on her cheeks, held up a cue card and smiled stiffly. "And now, the Powerball numbers," she announced. I didn't even look at first. After so many losing tickets, disappointment had dulled the excitement a long time ago. I pulled my ticket from my pocket anyway, out of habit more than hope, and glanced up. 16, the anchor said. My heart gave a small, cautious flutter. 16, my number. 28, I sucked in a breath. 5, my fingers tightened around the card handle. 13, a small noise escaped my throat, a whimper maybe, or a prayer. 22, the blood roared in my ears. And the Powerball is 9! I stared at the screen, frozen. The numbers echoed inside my head. 16, 28, 5, 13, 22, 9. I looked down at my crumpled ticket. Every number matched. Every single one. A dizzy wave swept over me, and the world tilted sharply to the left. The fluorescent lights above blurred into a hazy white cloud. My knees buckled. Someone shouted, but the sound was muffled, as if underwater. The last thing I felt was my cart slipping away from me, and then everything went black. When I opened my eyes, the room was spinning. The harsh scent of antiseptic filled my nostrils, and for a second, I didn't know where I was. Panic clawed up my throat. My hands scrambled over the thin hospital blanket, searching blindly. "My purse," I rasped. A nurse appeared from the blur, her voice soft. "You're safe, ma'am. Everything's here." I didn't believe her, not until I spotted it, my old battered handbag sitting on the little table beside the bed. My heart lurched painfully as I reached for it, my fingers trembling. Inside, tucked away where I had hidden it, was the lottery ticket, a little wrinkled, a little worse for wear, but untouched. Still mine, still real. I pressed it against my chest, feeling the hard truth of it against my pounding heart. A soft knock at the door startled me. A young doctor, barely old enough to shave, entered holding a clipboard. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said with a cautious smile, "you gave everyone quite a scare." I tried to sit up straighter, but my body betrayed me. My limbs were heavy, my chest tight. "You've got a strong case of the flu," he continued, flipping through papers. "Severe dehydration, weakness, and your age doesn't make recovery easier. It's going to take months to get your strength back." Months. The word hit harder than I expected. I nodded numbly, not trusting my voice. The doctor said a few more things about medications and rest, but I barely heard him. I was too busy staring at my purse, still gripping the strap like a lifeline. I should tell David, I thought. He's my son, my only family. For a fleeting moment, I pictured him rushing to my side, hugging me, saying he was glad I was all right. That's what sons were supposed to do, wasn't it? I reached for my phone, my fingers clumsy on the buttons. The call was short. He answered on the third ring. Yeah, Ma, what's going on? His voice was brisk, impatient. I swallowed hard. David, I'm at the hospital. I fainted. They say it's the flu. Pretty bad. There was a long pause. Too long. All right, he said finally. I'll come by. No warmth, no panic, no, are you okay? Just cold words sliding like ice down my spine. It took him 3 hours to show up. When he walked in, his eyes didn't even sweep over me to see if I was all right. He stood at the foot of the bed, hands jammed into the pockets of his expensive coat, looking like he had 100 better places to be. I'm fine, I said softly, forcing a smile. Weak, but I have something important to... He waved a hand, cutting me off. Look, Ma, we need to talk about getting you into a facility. I blinked. A facility? A place where they can take care of you properly. You can't stay alone anymore. Not after this. But David, He wasn't listening. He was already pulling out his phone, scrolling through something. There's a few nursing homes in town, he muttered. I'll find one that takes Medicare. We need to resolve this quickly. Resolve this, like I was some kind of burden to be dealt with. The words sliced through me sharper than any scalpel. I shrank back against the pillows, my throat too tight to speak. I wanted to tell him about the ticket, about how everything could be different now, about how I could afford the best doctors, the best care, hell, even a private nurse if I wanted. But looking at him, his hurried fingers, his furrowed brow, his sheer detachment, the words froze on my tongue. He didn't want me to get better. He wanted me gone. I don't remember much of the ride. They wheeled me out of the hospital bundled in a coat too thin for the biting air. I sat slumped in the wheelchair, clutching my handbag like it contained my very soul. Maybe it did. David didn't say much on the way. He tapped away on his phone, barely glancing at me. The only time he looked up was to mutter, "Almost there," as if he were delivering a package. Sunny Pines Care Home. That was the name painted on the cracked sign hanging above a battered front door. I knew before we even crossed the threshold that this wasn't a place meant for healing. It smelled of bleach and stale air. The front desk was unmanned. A television blared cartoons in the corner for no one in particular. A heavy-set nurse with tired eyes signed some papers David pushed in front of her. She didn't ask my name. She barely looked at me. David patted my shoulder once, a gesture so hollow it made my stomach turn, and left without a backward glance. The nurse didn't say much either, just wheeled me down a narrow, dimly lit hallway. The carpet was stained, the walls were scuffed. I caught glimpses of people, frail, hollow-eyed figures slumped in wheelchairs, staring at nothing. "This is you," the nurse said, pushing open a door. My room was the size of a broom closet. A single metal-framed bed sagged in the center. The walls were stained yellow with water damage, and the window barely let in any light. In one corner, a tiny table leaned precariously to one side, like it might give up and collapse at any moment. The smell of mildew and cleaning chemicals made my nose wrinkle. "There's dinner at 6, the nurse said. "Lights out at 9, and then she was gone. I sat there for a long time, my handbag clutched tightly in my lap. The lottery ticket pressed against my side like a heartbeat, proof that I didn't belong here, proof that I still had a way out. When the dinner bell rang, I forced myself up and shuffled to the dining hall. The meal was a tray of what looked like microwaved leftovers: rubbery chicken, cold mashed potatoes, overcooked green beans that smelled faintly of old socks. I took a seat at an empty table, the legs of the chair wobbling under my weight. "First day?" an old man croaked from 2 tables over. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Don't worry," he said with a sad smile. "You'll get used to being forgotten." All around me, people ate in silence. Some stared blankly at their trays. Others pushed food around without tasting it. A woman in a faded pink sweater mumbled to herself, rocking back and forth. A thin man with shaking hands tried, and failed, to lift his fork to his mouth. My heart broke. Not for me, for them. Left here like broken toys, forgotten, discarded. The next morning, I wandered the common areas, trying to find some spark of life. I met Mary, who spoke only of the husband who hadn't visited in 7 years. I met Thomas, who once ran a hardware store, but now couldn't remember what city he lived in. I met June, who showed me a photo of a boy, her grandson, she said, who never called. I listened to their stories, nodding, smiling when I could. Each one left a deeper mark on my soul. By noon, the truth was too heavy to ignore. David hadn't brought me here because he cared. He didn't think I was sick enough to need real help. He thought I was a problem to be stored away, just like the others. If it hadn't been for that piece of paper in my bag, that miracle ticket, I would have ended up just like them. Another forgotten body in a crumbling home. Another face no one came to visit. That night, as I lay on the lumpy mattress staring at the cracked ceiling, I made a decision. I wasn't going to rot here. Not today. Not ever. I was getting out. I knew I had to be smart. No one here would believe I had a future outside these crumbling walls. They saw me as another frail old woman, too broken to fight back. Let them think that. Let them think I was harmless. The first step was getting out. "Excuse me," I said to the woman behind the front desk the next morning. Her name tag said Sharon, but she barely looked up from her crossword puzzle. "Yeah?" she grunted. "I need to go to the bank," I said, summoning every ounce of frailty I could fake. I have some bills that need paying. Important ones. I don't want to fall behind." She sighed, tapping her pen against the counter. "Family can handle that, can't they?" "My son," I said, forcing a tremor into my voice. "He's busy." At the word son, she gave a sympathetic grunt. The kind people reserve for sad cases they don't really want to deal with. "I'll have to get approval," she said. It took 2 full days. 2 days of begging, filling out forms, waiting for some supervisor to rubber stamp a permission slip like I was a schoolgirl needing to use the bathroom. But finally, they agreed to let a staff member escort me, a young nurse named Becky, who smelled like bubblegum and barely paid attention to anything I said. The morning of the bank trip, I dressed carefully in my best, which wasn't much, and tucked my handbag tight under my arm. Every step to that bank felt like walking a tightrope. If Becky noticed my tension, she didn't comment. She dropped me off at the front entrance and said she'd wait in the parking lot. "Rules," she said. "Liability reasons. Fine by me." Inside, the bank was cool and bright, polished floors shining under the fluorescent lights. The place smelled of fresh coffee and printer ink, the smell of normalcy, of freedom. I went straight to the first teller I saw. "I need to speak with a manager." "Please," I said, my voice low, urgent. The young woman blinked, looking me over. Another old woman clutching a battered purse, but something in my eyes must have convinced her. She nodded and disappeared into the back. A few minutes later, a tall man in a crisp navy suit came out. His name tag read, Mr. Caldwell, branch manager. He smiled, the polite but distant smile bankers reserve for minor nuisances. "How can I help you today, ma'am?" I leaned in, keeping my voice barely above a whisper. "I won the lottery," I said. His eyebrows twitched upward, but he recovered quickly. "I see," he said carefully. "Ed, would you like to step into my office?" Once the door closed behind us, I pulled the ticket from my handbag, still tucked safely inside a plastic sandwich bag to protect it. He leaned over it, squinting, then sat back, visibly rattled. "I need help," I said, folding my hands in my lap to hide the way they shook. "Real help. I can't let anyone else know, especially not my family." He didn't ask questions. He didn't patronize me. Instead, he picked up the phone and made one quiet call. "Michael," he said, "I need you down here. It's urgent." Less than 15 minutes later, a second man walked into the room. This one was older, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense air. He carried a leather briefcase that looked more expensive than my entire wardrobe. "This is Mr. Whitaker," the manager said. "He's an attorney. Trustworthy." Mr. Whitaker sat down across from me and folded his hands. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said calmly, "you've just become one of the most interesting people in Spokane today, and I'm here to make sure you stay safe and very, very invisible." I nodded, relief flooding me for the first time in what felt like weeks. Maybe, just maybe, I was finally taking my life back. Everything started moving faster after that day at the bank. Mr. Whitaker didn't waste time. He handled everything. The claim, the legal protections, the setup of private accounts, all discreet, all safe. "First rule," he said during one of our secret meetings in a side room at the bank, "no one needs to know what you have. Not your family, not your friends. Not even your dog if you had one." I smiled at that. A real smile, the first in a long time. Within days, the papers were filed. My winnings were secured under a newly created trust fund, masked under layers of confidentiality agreements. Not even the lottery office could publicly release my name. Mr. Whitaker worked miracles, and I trusted him. The next step was getting out of Sunny Pines. I sat with a doctor, one hand still gripping my handbag, and presented new medical documents Mr. Whitaker arranged. They stated I had the financial means to hire private care and no longer needed to stay in an institutional setting. The administrator didn't argue. She barely looked up from her computer as she clicked through forms. "Well, you're free to go then," she said flatly. No party, no farewell. No one even offered a handshake. Becky, the bubblegum nurse, wheeled me to the front door with the same careless efficiency she had shown when she brought me in. I didn't look back. A black town car waited at the curb. The driver, a man in a dark suit, opened the door with a small nod. I climbed in, my heart hammering in my chest, half afraid someone would come running after me, dragging me back to that prison. But no one did. The car pulled away from Sunny Pines, and I watched through the window as the crumbling building grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared altogether. Good riddance. The next few days were a blur of quiet triumphs. First, the house. A stunning single-story property nestled in a gated community on the edge of Spokane. White stone exterior, wide glass windows, lush green lawns meticulously trimmed, privacy, peace, safety. I walked through the halls in a daze, gleaming hardwood floors under my feet, a kitchen with marble counters, a sunroom overlooking a private garden. It was more than I ever dreamed I could afford, but now it was mine. Then the car. A sleek, deep blue Cadillac, brand new, smelling of leather and possibilities. The salesman had smiled politely when I paid cash, trying to hide his surprise. Another old woman with a hidden fortune. Let them wonder. I moved into the house without fanfare. No neighbors dropping by with welcome baskets. No curious faces peeking over fences. That's what I wanted, to disappear into a quiet life. I bought new clothes, cozy furniture, stocked the kitchen with all my favorite foods. I filled the house with warm blankets, candles that smelled of vanilla and cinnamon, soft music floating through the air. And I did it all without calling David, without telling him a thing. For once, my life was mine alone. And for the first time in a very long time, I slept through the night without fear and without regret. I had no intention of telling David anything. After all the silence, after all the indifference, he didn't deserve to know. Instead, I turned my thoughts back to the ones who had been forgotten alongside me, the ones I had left behind at Sunny Pines. I remembered the soft-spoken woman, Mary, who had said wistfully, "I just wish I had more paints, bigger canvases too. I miss real color." I remembered Thomas, the man who could barely hold a fork but lit up when he spoke about his dream of having a television of his own. Not just the broken communal one in the lounge. I remembered June, whose tired eyes had brightened only once, when she said, "It would be nice to have more board games, you know. Something to make us feel like we're still living. Small wishes, modest dreams, dreams the world had told them were too much to ask. I couldn't save them all, but I could give them something back." So, I did. A few anonymous deliveries, scattered over 2 weeks, giant, vibrant canvases and boxes of acrylic paints in every shade imaginable. A brand new television installed in Thomas's tiny room, complete with a remote that was easier for trembling hands to use. A massive donation of games, checkers, cards, puzzles, and new sturdy tables set up in the rec room. No notes, no signatures, just gifts, appearing like little pieces of magic. I imagined their faces, the surprise, the laughter, the tiny sparks of joy. And for the first time in what felt like decades, I felt a piece of my heart stitch itself back together. Of course, secrets don't stay secrets for long. Rumors started swirling through Sunny Pines almost immediately. They whispered about the rich old lady who had vanished one morning and suddenly showered them with presents. It didn't take long for word to seep into the world outside those cracked walls. And eventually, it reached David. It was almost a month after I left when he finally showed up at Sunny Pines, no doubt after piecing together half-truths and desperate gossip. But by then, I was long gone. All he found was a plain envelope left behind at the front desk. Inside, my new address, scribbled in my neat handwriting. No letter, no explanation. I wanted to see how long it would take for him to come find me. Turns out, it didn't take long at all once he smelled money. One crisp afternoon, as the autumn leaves tumbled across my driveway, a knock echoed through the quiet of my new home. I knew who it was before I even opened the door. David stood there, hands shoved in his pockets, a strained smile plastered across his face. "Mom?" he said, trying to sound casual. "You moved? Why didn't you tell me?" I stepped aside just enough to let the sunlight frame him, but not enough to invite him in. "I didn't think you'd be interested," I said, my voice calm, steady. "You made it very clear you were done with me." His smile faltered. "I'm your son," he said, almost accusingly. "And when I needed you," I answered, "you put me in a warehouse for the dying." The words hung between us like smoke, heavy and choking. "I didn't know," he started, but I cut him off. "I won the lottery, David," I said, my voice cold and sharp like winter air. "All by myself." He stared at me, stunned. I leaned on the doorframe, my eyes never leaving his. "You left me when you thought I was nothing," I said quietly. "Now, the feeling is mutual." And with that, I closed the door, softly, firmly. I thought slamming the door would be the end of it. I thought David would walk away, wounded pride dragging him back into whatever life he had built without me. But I underestimated him. Or maybe I overestimated myself. The next morning, the first call came. I stared at the phone buzzing on the kitchen counter, David's name flashing across the screen like a ghost I couldn't quite banish. I let it ring. The next day, it rang again, and again. Sometimes he left messages. Sometimes he just hung up. Each time, his voice grew a little softer, a little more desperate. "Hey, Ma, just checking in. Hope you're doing okay. Ma, I was thinking about you. Maybe I could stop by. I miss you, Ma." The flowers started arriving after a week. First, a modest bouquet of yellow daisies, my favorite, though I never told him that. Then a larger arrangement. Roses, lilies, sunflowers, enough blooms to fill the house with their sweet, heavy scent. Little gifts followed. A soft scarf in my favorite shade of blue. A box of chocolates wrapped with a silver ribbon. A framed photo of us, from years ago, before life had worn so many cracks into our smiles. At first, I left everything unopened. But the silence in the house grew louder, day by day. The radio no longer filled the rooms the way it used to. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway felt like a hammer striking steel. Loneliness seeped through the walls, no matter how tightly I closed the windows. And so, one morning, I answered the call. "Hi, Ma," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Can I come by, just to talk?" Against my better judgment, I agreed. He came in carrying a bag of groceries, fresh fruits, a loaf of artisanal bread, a jar of homemade jam, things I hadn't even asked for. He sat at the kitchen table, fidgeting with a napkin, looking awkward and unsure. For the first time in a long time, he didn't rush me. He asked about my day. He listened when I spoke, and part of me, the part that remembered kissing scraped knees and packing school lunches, wanted so badly to believe. Maybe he regretted what he had done. Maybe he realized what he almost lost. Maybe, just maybe, he still loved me. The visits became more frequent. He would bring takeout and we'd sit by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his job, his struggles, his regrets. He laughed at my jokes, real, belly-deep laughs that I hadn't heard from him since he was a boy. Little by little, the walls I had built around my heart started to crack. I told myself to stay guarded. I told myself he was only back because he wanted something. But late at night, when the house grew too still and the memories clawed at the edges of my mind, another voice whispered, "Maybe he's changed. Maybe this time will be different." And oh, how desperately I wanted to believe it. At first, it seemed innocent. David started showing up with more than just flowers and groceries. He brought smoothies he claimed were packed with vitamins, homemade desserts, a little sweet treat to lift your spirits, bottles of herbal supplements, all wrapped up with bright labels boasting natural healing powers. "You need to take better care of yourself, Ma," he'd say, flashing that same boyish grin that used to melt me when he was 5 years old. And I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that he was trying to make up for lost time, that he was trying, in his own clumsy way, to be a good son. So, when he handed me a glass of green juice one afternoon, I didn't hesitate. It tasted bitter, sharp, but I drank it anyway. smiling weakly when he asked if I liked it. Minutes later, the room tilted. A wave of nausea slammed into me. Cold sweat broke out across my skin. My hands trembled so violently the glass slipped from my fingers and shattered on the floor. "David!" I gasped, but the words tangled in my throat. I stumbled toward the counter, my knees buckling. The last thing I saw before the world went black was his face. Wide eyes, mouth moving in a silent scream, and then nothing. When I woke up, the hospital lights were too bright, too sterile. Machines beeped softly around me. A nurse adjusted an IV in my arm, offering a tight smile. "You had a reaction, Mrs. Sullivan," she said. "Allergic, most likely." "Allergic?" I blinked up at her, confusion clouding my mind. I've never had allergies," I whispered. She shrugged. "Sometimes they develop later in life. You're lucky it wasn't worse." Lucky. That word rattled in my skull like a loose bolt. David was there, hovering by the door, wringing his hands. He looked concerned. Too concerned. "Thank God you're okay, Ma," he said, rushing to my side. I was so scared. He squeezed my hand. His grip was a little too tight. I stared at him, searching his face for something, anything, that would make sense of what had happened. Surely he didn't mean for this to happen. Surely he wouldn't hurt me. Would he? A cold knot formed in my stomach, twisting tighter with every breath. "No, he's your son. He loves you, doesn't he?" But another voice, colder, sharper, whispered from the corners of my mind. "He left you once, when he thought you were a burden. What makes you think he wouldn't do it again, if he thought there was something to gain?" I closed my eyes, pretending to rest, pretending to believe. But deep inside, the seed of doubt had already taken root, and it was growing. When I was discharged from the hospital, David insisted on taking charge. "You can't be alone, Ma," he said, his tone firm, almost parental. "You need real care. Someone who knows what they're doing." I wanted to argue, but my body still felt too weak, my mind too foggy, and somewhere, buried under all the fear, there was a tiny part of me that still wanted to believe he was trying to help. So, when he introduced me to Marla, a private nurse he had hired, I forced a smile. She was a thin woman with pale skin stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She wore a neat white uniform, her hair pinned into a severe bun, and moved with the precision of someone who didn't waste steps or words. "Don't worry, Mrs. Sullivan," she said, her voice smooth like cold syrup. "I'm here to make sure you get exactly what you need." At first, I tried to accept it. She brought me trays of food at strict hours. She handed me tiny paper cups filled with colorful pills, explaining in vague terms that they were for my heart or for my nerves. She hovered near me constantly, always watching, always waiting. It wasn't just the medications. It was the way she would stand too close when she thought I wasn't looking, the way her eyes would flick to my handbag, the one that never left my side, when she thought I was asleep. The house no longer felt like mine. It felt like a prison, and I was the inmate. Every time I asked about a pill, she would brush me off. "Just take it, dear. Doctor's orders." But I hadn't seen a doctor. Not one. One night, long after Marla thought I had drifted off under her careful sleeping aids, I woke up. My body felt like lead, my mind slow and syrupy. But somehow, a sliver of consciousness pushed through the fog. I heard her, in the hallway, on the phone. Her voice was low, urgent, but the words cut through the haze like knives. "Today she'll sleep heavy," she said. "Tomorrow she won't wake up." The blood in my veins turned to ice. I forced my eyes closed again. Heart pounding so loudly I was sure she could hear it. Every instinct screamed at me. Stay still, stay quiet, stay alive. Lying there, helpless and trapped inside my own body, I realized the horrifying truth. This wasn't just about forgetting my pills. This wasn't about being overcautious. This was about getting rid of me. For good. I don't know how I found the strength. My body felt like it was made of sand, crumbling, slipping, barely held together by fear. But somehow, some desperate part of me still clawed toward survival. I waited, listening to Marla's footsteps fade down the hallway, waited for the house to fall silent. Then, I moved. Every step was agony. My legs barely obeyed me, my vision blurred and doubled, but I clutched my handbag to my chest, the same way I clutched my last scraps of hope, and staggered toward the front door. The lock felt like an impossible puzzle, my fingers fumbling clumsily with the knob. But by some miracle, it turned. The cold night air hit me like a slap across the face, sharp, brutal, alive. I stumbled down the porch steps, my shoes scraping against the concrete. The stars above me blurred and spun, but I kept moving. One step, another, another. Somewhere behind me I thought I heard a door creak open. Panic shot through me, sharper than any drug they could have pumped into my veins. I broke into a lurching run, heart pounding so hard it drowned out everything else. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. The streets were empty. Dark houses, silent driveways, the whole world asleep while I fought for my life. Then, like a beacon, I saw it, a convenience store. Its fluorescent lights buzzing against the darkness like a lighthouse. I crashed through the door, nearly collapsing onto the grimy floor. The clerk, a teenager with wide, startled eyes, jumped back. "Ma'am, are you okay?" I tried to speak, but all that came out was a ragged whisper. "Help me," I gasped. "Please, call the police." He fumbled for the phone, eyes darting nervously between me and the empty parking lot outside. Within minutes, sirens cut through the night air. Red and blue lights painted the store walls as two officers burst through the door. They wrapped a blanket around me, guided me to a bench, asked gentle but urgent questions. I told them everything, about the pills, the drinks, the care that wasn't care at all. At first, I saw skepticism flicker in their eyes. An old woman, confused, maybe paranoid. But when I handed over the plastic pill bottles Marla had been forcing on me, their faces changed, fast. Within hours, detectives were at my house. They searched, they interviewed, and they found what they needed. Switches in my prescriptions, unauthorized medications hidden in kitchen drawers, handwritten notes detailing dosages, increasing steadily. It wasn't meant to heal me. It was meant to kill me, slowly, quietly, in a way that could be written off as natural causes. David's fingerprints were all over everything. His authorization forms, his emails, even bank transfers to Marla labeled as healthcare services. The plan was clear: take everything from me and leave me dead before anyone thought to ask questions. But I was still here, still breathing, and this time, I was the one holding the cards. The day of the hearing arrived with cold gray skies and a steady drizzle that seemed to seep into my bones. I sat stiffly in the courtroom, the hard wooden bench pressing against my back, my hands folded tightly in my lap. The room smelled like old paper and disinfectant, filled with low murmurs and the scratch of pens against legal pads. David sat across from me, at the defendant's table. He looked small, smaller than I remembered. He wore a wrinkled suit and a tie that hung too loose around his neck, like a child playing dress-up in a world far too serious for him. For a moment, just a moment, my heart twisted. This was my son, the same boy I had rocked to sleep, the same boy who had once clung to my hand crossing the street, trusting me to protect him from the world. But the man sitting there now was not that boy. He had become something colder, something I no longer recognized. The charges were read aloud in a voice that echoed through the high ceilings. Attempted homicide, criminal conspiracy, elder abuse. Each word landed like a blow. David didn't look at me, not once. When they called me to the stand, my legs trembled slightly as I stood, but my voice did not. I told the truth. How he had tried to isolate me, how he had orchestrated the medications, how he had smiled and lied and planned my death as easily as if he were arranging a dinner reservation. I didn't cry, not even when they played the recordings from the store clerk, not even when they showed the forged documents. And when the judge finally ordered him to stand, when the bailiff stepped forward and clamped cold metal cuffs around his wrists, I sat perfectly still. I didn't look away. David turned once, maybe hoping to see some flicker of forgiveness in my face, some sign that, despite everything, I would reach out for him. But I didn't, because whatever love had once lived inside me for him, that blind, desperate love only a mother can feel, had died the night he tried to kill me. What remained was something quieter, heavier, a mourning not for the man he had become, but for the boy he had been, and for the mother I had been, the one who had believed he would never hurt her. As the courtroom doors slammed shut behind him, a strange emptiness settled into my chest. Not victory, not triumph, just silence. After the trial, I had choices to make. I could have disappeared, bought a beach house somewhere warm, and spent my days sipping cocktails and forgetting the past. But that wasn't who I was. That had never been who I was. So instead, I started giving back. I used the money not just to rebuild my life, but to rebuild lives around me. I went back to Sunny Pines first, the place where I had once been discarded like an old sweater no one wanted. I didn't just throw money at it. I tore it down to its foundation and started over. I hired real staff, nurses who smiled and listened, caretakers who treated every resident like family, not obligations. We repainted the walls in bright colors. We built gardens, brought in therapy animals, installed a library filled with large print books. Every room got a television. Every resident got their dignity back. And it wasn't just Sunny Pines. I funded new senior homes across the state. Real homes, not warehouses. Places filled with laughter, music, art, places where the forgotten could be remembered. Every month, I sent anonymous donations to shelters, food banks, clinics, every dollar a quiet rebellion against the coldness that had tried to kill me. I traveled too, not to escape, but to see, to stand on mountaintops and breathe in the thin air, to walk through bustling markets and feel life pulse around me, to remind myself that the world was still big and I was still part of it. But no matter where I went, I never forgot him. David. Every month, like clockwork, I visited the prison. I sat across the scratched glass partition, picked up the heavy phone, and looked into the tired, hollow eyes of the boy I once rocked to sleep. He never said much. Neither did I. Sometimes he apologized, words tumbling out of him like broken glass. Sometimes he just sat there, staring, and every time I listened. Because despite everything, he was still my son. Love doesn't always die cleanly. Sometimes it limps along, bruised and battered, but still breathing. Maybe that was the final lesson life had to teach me. Now, most mornings, I sit on my new porch. A cup of strong coffee warming my hands, the breeze tugging gently at my hair. The world feels wide open again, a little quieter, a little lonelier, but mine. I sip my coffee slowly, watching the sunrise spill gold across the sky. And for the first time in years, I smile, really smile, without sadness or fear. Because I lost a son, but somewhere along the way, I found myself. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. Have you ever felt alive but already forgotten? What would you do if the people you trusted the most started treating you like you were already gone? This is the story of how I lost everything and how I got it all back on my own terms. Stay with me, and don't forget to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. I always thought the worst thing that could happen to a person was death. I was wrong. The worst thing is being alive and realizing no one cares if you are. My name is Martha Reynolds. I'm 84 years old, born and raised in a little town in Illinois. I used to be strong, fierce even. The kind of woman who ran a household, balanced a checkbook to the penny, and held family dinners every Sunday without fail. But life has a way of peeling away your layers when you get old, slowly, quietly, until you're just a burden. I still had my mind. Oh, don't think for a second I didn't know exactly what was happening around me. It was my body that betrayed me. A slow, cruel decline from the moment they diagnosed me with that damned degenerative disease. Arthritis, heart failure, tiny strokes that left me weaker each time. But my mind, sharp as ever. At first, my children, David, Lisa, and Michael, came around often enough. Lisa would bring her kids, David would sit with me in the afternoons, and Michael, well, he always had an excuse. Work, stress, you name it. But I convinced myself it was enough, until I noticed the changes. The visits became shorter, more distracted. The conversations, less about me and more about things. Or things I owned, things they wanted. I guess Mom won't be needing that china cabinet much longer, I overheard Lisa say once, laughing nervously. David talked about selling the house to help cover costs. Michael mentioned power of attorney. Just to help with the bills, Mom, nothing serious. I smiled. I nodded. I said yes to their faces and cried when they left, because even though I was still breathing, still feeling, still here, they were already dividing me up. I wasn't their mother anymore. I was inventory. One evening, after they'd left, I sat in my living room, alone with the clock ticking too loudly on the wall. I looked at the photographs, birthdays, graduations, weddings, moments when I mattered, when I wasn't just a body in a chair. I realized then, in that hollow silence, that my fight wasn't against my illness. It was against invisibility. They forgot that I built the ground they walked on. They forgot who made their Christmas mornings magical, who sat up with them through fevers and heartbreaks, who sacrificed every dream for their comfort. And now, they wanted the couch I bought, the jewelry I wore, the house I cleaned, the money I saved, but not me. Not really. I wasn't ready to let go yet, but it didn't seem to matter anymore. At night, I'd lie in bed, listening to the house creak and moan, and wonder if it was crying with me. Maybe it knew what I refused to admit. I was becoming a ghost in my own life, the kind of ghost no one notices until it's too late. And the worst part? I still loved them. Despite everything, that was my curse. But curses, I would soon learn, could be broken, and mine was just getting started. After months of half-hearted visits and quick goodbyes, it happened. A Sunday afternoon, the kind we used to spend laughing around the dinner table, now reduced to tense conversations over lukewarm coffee. David was the one who said it first. "Mom, we've been thinking, maybe it's time we got you some help, a professional caregiver, someone who can be here full-time." Lisa chimed in, trying to soften the blow. "You deserve proper care, Mom. We can't be here all the time. You know how busy things have been lately." Busy. Always so busy. Too busy to sit with me. Too busy to listen. Michael just nodded, staring at his phone, barely pretending to care. I sat there, nodding along like a good little patient, as if I had any say. Inside, I felt something crack, but I was tired. Tired of fighting battles no one else even saw. "Whatever you think is best," I said. My voice barely more than a whisper. They smiled, relieved. David patted my hand like I was some worn-out pet. Lisa started scrolling through her phone immediately, listing agencies and reviews. Michael said something about splitting the cost. They spoke around me, over me, but never to me. I wasn't their mother anymore. I was their responsibility. As they planned, I stared at the vase on the coffee table. It was a wedding gift from my mother. Delicate, beautiful. It had survived decades of moves, fights, laughter, and life. Now it sat in front of me, just like I did, fragile, forgotten, and at risk of being discarded. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I thought about my husband, Jack. God, how I missed him. He would have known what to do. He would have fought for me. But Jack had been gone for 15 years, and the kids I raised weren't those bright-eyed babies anymore. They were busy, tired adults, weighed down by mortgages, deadlines, and dreams that no longer included me. I became scenery, a chair in the corner, a reminder of mortality they preferred not to look at for too long. The worst part was the shame. I hated myself for needing them, for wishing they'd stay just a little longer, for hoping, foolishly, that maybe today would be different. It never was. And then, one Thursday morning, I heard Lisa on the phone. "Claire will be starting next week," she said, her voice tight and efficient. "She comes highly recommended. Full-time coverage. That should take care of everything. Take care of everything." Like I was a chore on a checklist, I stood quietly in the hallway, listening. Not a single word about how I might feel. Not a single thought about what I wanted. The only thing I knew for sure was that the next chapter of my life was no longer mine to write, or so I thought. But life, as I would soon find out, had other plans. The morning Claire arrived, the house felt colder than usual. Maybe it was just me, my nerves, the aching truth that even my own children had decided I needed a stranger to care for me. Or maybe it was the way the light hit the kitchen table, dust swirling in the air like tiny ghosts of everything I was losing. The doorbell rang. Lisa answered before I could even think about getting up. And then, there she was, Claire. Young, much younger than I expected. Maybe late 20s with kind eyes and a warm, open smile that didn't seem forced like everyone else's. She wore simple jeans, a soft sweater, and her brown hair was tied back in a loose ponytail. No heavy makeup, no fake sweetness dripping from her voice. Just real. "Hi, Mrs. Reynolds," she said, stepping inside like a breeze. "I'm Claire. It's so nice to meet you." Her voice wasn't loud. It wasn't pitying. It was kind, calm, human. Lisa did all the talking, of course, bustling around, explaining schedules and medications like she was dropping off a package, not a person. I barely listened. I just watched Claire, and she watched me, really watched me. Not my wheelchair, not the pill bottles on the counter. Me. After Lisa left, with her usual flurry of keys jangling and promises to check in later, the house went quiet. Claire turned to me and smiled. Not the professional plastic smile I'd come to expect, but something warmer. "Mind if I sit with you for a bit?" she asked. No one had asked me that in a long time. I nodded. She pulled a chair close, not across the room like the others did, but right next to me, where she could lean in and talk like I was, well, like I was still worth talking to. At first, I was stiff, cautious. I answered her questions with short, polite replies. How long had I lived in this house? What was my favorite memory here? What kind of music did I like? Simple questions. But no one had asked me simple questions in years. They only asked about my insurance, my will, my health. Claire didn't rush. She listened, really listened. When I mentioned that I used to love dancing, she laughed and said, "You've got that sparkle, Mrs. Reynolds. I bet you were the life of the party." I surprised myself by smiling. We sat for hours, just talking. Or rather, I talked, and she made it feel like it mattered. Later that afternoon, as she prepared tea for us, she told me about herself. She grew up hard, she said. No father around. A mother who worked 3 jobs just to keep a roof over their heads. She'd seen what loneliness did to people. She knew how easy it was to feel invisible. "I see a lot of myself in you," Claire said, setting the tea down gently beside me. "You're stronger than they give you credit for." My throat tightened. No one had said I was strong in a long, long time. That night, after she left, I sat by the window and looked out into the darkness. The house felt different, less like a tomb, more like a place where someone, still lived. For the first time in months, I didn't dread tomorrow. I found myself looking forward to seeing Claire again, to hearing her voice cut through the heavy silence. The next day she came back, and the next, and the next. Each visit, she brought something small, a flower from her walk, a new book she thought I'd like, a homemade cookie still warm from the oven. Tiny gestures, but they built a bridge back to something I thought I had lost forever: hope. In the mornings, we would sit in the garden, sipping coffee as the sun warmed our faces. In the afternoons, we would play cards, laugh about the silly things, share stories that made me feel young again. When the pain got bad, she was there, not just with medicine, but with presence. When I cried, missing Jack or feeling the sting of abandonment, she listened without rushing me. With Claire, I wasn't a burden. I wasn't a problem to be managed. I was a person. One evening, as she tucked a blanket over my legs, she said quietly, "You're not alone, Mrs. Reynolds. Not while I'm here." And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I believed it. Maybe Claire wasn't just my caregiver. Maybe she was my second chance at not being forgotten. It was a Tuesday, the kind of day that should have meant nothing. The sun poured through the windows, golden and warm, and for a moment, everything almost felt normal. Claire had made lunch, chicken salad, soft bread, lemonade with too much sugar, just the way I liked it. We laughed about something silly she'd seen on the news. I remember feeling light, almost happy, and then everything tilted. One minute I was reaching for my glass, the next the room spun violently around me, my vision blurred. The chair fell away from under me. I heard Claire's voice, sharp with panic, calling my name. I tried to answer, but the words got stuck somewhere deep inside me. Then darkness, heavy, complete. When I opened my eyes, the world was a stranger. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, cold and clinical. The walls around me were stark white. No familiar furniture, no pictures, no home. I blinked, trying to piece together where I was, what had happened. A nurse noticed I was awake and shuffled over. "Good morning, Martha. You're in Shady Grove Care Center. You've been here 2 days. Try not to move too much." Shady Grove Care Center. A name so sanitized, it made my stomach twist. I tried to sit up, panic rising like a flood, but my muscles were too weak. "Where's Claire?" I rasped, my throat dry as sand. "She's not allowed back here," the nurse said briskly, adjusting my IV. "Your children made the arrangements. They signed the consent forms. You'll be staying with us now." I stared at her, my mind racing to catch up. Arrangements? Consent forms? No one had told me. No one had asked me. I wanted to scream, but the sound died in my chest. When the nurse left, I scanned the room. No phone, No personal belongings. My purse, my cell phone, gone. Cut off, isolated. They didn't just move me, they erased me. Hours blurred into days. The food was tasteless, a mushy parade of beige. The nurses were polite but distant, mechanical in their kindness. No visitors, no calls, not even a single text from David, Lisa, or Michael. I had become what they always saw me as, a problem tucked neatly away. At night, the cries of other forgotten souls echoed down the sterile halls, old men shouting for wives long dead, women sobbing into threadbare pillows. It was a graveyard where the bodies still breathed. I pressed my hand against the cold metal of the bed rail and made myself a promise. I would not die here. I would not let them bury me alive. But as the hours dragged on, hope thinned, until one afternoon, just when I thought I might slip into the silence for good, a figure appeared at the door. Claire. She wasn't supposed to be there, but somehow she found me. She slipped inside quickly, pressing a finger to her lips to hush any questions. Her face was pale, eyes wide with fear and fury. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Reynolds," she whispered, gripping my hand tightly. "They didn't even tell me. I came by the house and it was empty. I had to fight just to find out where they sent you." Tears welled up in my eyes. She was here. She still cared. "You still have rights," Claire said fiercely. "They can't just leave you here." For the first time since waking up in this whitewashed prison, I felt a spark inside me, a tiny, stubborn flame. I wasn't alone, not yet. Claire promised she'd come back every day, that she'd find a way to get me out. I didn't know if I believed her, but I wanted to. I needed to. As she squeezed my hand one last time before slipping away again, I realized something. My family had abandoned me without a second thought. But somewhere out there, at least one person was still fighting for me. It wasn't the people who shared my blood. It was the one I least expected. And that small, impossible fact gave me enough strength to survive another night. The days at Shady Grove stretched out like endless gray ribbons. Mornings bled into afternoons, afternoons into long, sleepless nights. The clock on the wall seemed to move slower here, ticking out a sentence I hadn't agreed to serve. Most of the other residents barely spoke. Some stared blankly at the walls. Others cried out in confusion, lost in memories no one else could see. I became one of them. Another forgotten figure in a sea of wheelchairs and hospital gowns. My children? They didn't come. Not once. No cards, no phone calls, not even a voicemail. Maybe they thought I wouldn't notice. Maybe they didn't care if I did. But Claire showed up. Every single day. She wasn't allowed inside officially. Visitors were restricted, rules wrapped in red tape and polite apologies. But somehow, Claire found ways to sneak in. A friend who worked a shift, a nurse who owed her a favor. Each morning, like clockwork, I would hear a soft knock at my door, and there she'd be. Sometimes she brought books, old worn novels with cracked spines that smelled like home. Sometimes it was a crossword puzzle, or a candy bar hidden in her bag. Other times, it was just her presence. We would sit by the small, barred window, sharing the quiet. She'd read aloud, her voice soft and steady, weaving stories into the stale air. Or she'd just listen, really listen. I told her things I hadn't spoken aloud in years, about Jack, about our early days scraping by in a tiny apartment over a hardware store, about the first time I held David in my arms, scared out of my mind and happier than I'd ever been, about the loneliness that crept in when everyone else's lives moved on and mine stayed still. She made me feel seen. She made me feel real. Even small things, the way she adjusted my blanket without being asked, the way she smiled at me like I was still worth smiling at, wove tiny threads of hope back into my heart. I didn't realize it then, but those quiet, stolen afternoons with her were building something inside me. Something stronger than anger, stronger than grief. I might have been buried alive by the people I loved most, but with Claire beside me, I would claw my way out, and soon I would remind them all exactly who Martha Reynolds was. Freedom didn't come in a grand, triumphant moment. It came in paperwork, in quiet negotiations, in signatures scratched onto official documents that felt more like a resurrection than a release. Claire worked tirelessly behind the scenes. She spoke with doctors, pulled medical reports, consulted patient rights advocates. Turns out, you can't just toss a woman into a nursing home against her will, not if she's still lucid, still capable. It took weeks, Weeks of waiting, hoping, and fighting the fear that it might all fall apart. But one cold Thursday morning, a caseworker handed me a stack of forms and said the words I never thought I'd hear. "You're being discharged, Mrs. Reynolds." I didn't cry. Not there. Not where they could see me. But inside, I was screaming. Claire helped arrange everything. No way was I going back to the old house, the one my children had already started treating like a corpse awaiting burial. Instead, she suggested one of the apartments Jack and I had bought years ago as an investment. Still untouched. Still mine. The taxi ride to the apartment was a blur. My heart raced with a strange mix of terror and hope. Claire walked beside me, her hand light but steady on my arm. "You're free now," she whispered as we stepped out onto the cracked sidewalk. The building was old but sturdy, the red bricks chipped in places, the lobby heavy with the smell of floor polish and forgotten dreams. But it was mine, or so I thought. The key still fit the lock, the door creaked open, and what I found inside nearly dropped me to my knees. Stacks of paperwork littered the kitchen counter. Contracts, sale agreements, legal notices. At first, I couldn't make sense of it. Then Claire picked up a folder, flipping through it quickly. Her face hardened. "These are property sale agreements," she said, voice low and shaking. "And power of attorney documents. Look," she held up a page, "signed by you. Except, it's not your signature." "Is it?" I stared, my hands trembling. No, it wasn't. The handwriting was careful, practiced, but not mine. A poor imitation. The kind someone thought an old, forgotten woman wouldn't catch. Michael's name was everywhere. David's too. And Lisa's husband, the lawyer. Of course, they had been busy. Arrangements were already underway to liquidate everything. The house, the apartments, the antiques. They hadn't even waited for me to die. They had buried me on paper, declared me dead with ink and lies. My legs gave out, and Claire caught me, helping me to the worn armchair by the window. The same kind of window I used to watch them leave from, back when I still believed they loved me. It all made sense now. They hadn't been caring for me. They had been managing their future assets. God, how blind I had been. I should have seen it coming. The way they looked at the house like it was a prize. The way they spoke of me in past tense when they thought I couldn't hear. The betrayal burned hotter than any fever. But beneath the grief, something harder took root. Something colder. Claire knelt beside me, her face fierce. "We can fix this," she said. "You still have the power. You still have time." Time. A gift I never thought I'd have again. I closed my eyes, let the rage and pain wash over me, and then drew a deep, steadying breath. They stole my trust. They stole my dignity. But they would not steal my ending. Not while I still had a breath left to fight. The next morning, the first thing I did was call my lawyer. His name was Mr. Whitmore, a man I'd known for decades. He handled Jack's will after he died, helped me set up trusts for the kids when they were young. I trusted him, at least more than I trusted anyone else right now. When he answered, his voice was cautious, polite. "Martha, it's been a long time. Too long. I need to change my will," I said, my voice steady. Immediately, there was a pause. "There. Of course. Are you sure you want to?" "I'm sure," I cut him off. "Bring the paperwork. Today." Within hours, he was standing in the living room of that little apartment, papers tucked neatly into his leather briefcase. His face showed nothing, but I could feel the questions buzzing under his skin. He didn't ask them. Maybe he already knew. Maybe he had seen this kind of thing before. Families who picked the bones clean before the body was even cold. Claire sat quietly in the corner, her hands folded in her lap, face pale. She didn't know why I had called him. Not yet. I took a deep breath and began. "I want to revoke the old will completely. Wipe it clean." Whitmore nodded slowly, pulling out a thick folder. "And who will inherit your estate now?" he asked. I turned to Claire. She looked up at me, confusion flickering in her eyes. "She will," I said, my voice strong. Claire's mouth dropped open. "Mrs. Reynolds, no, I can't, you can't." She stumbled over the words, hands fluttering helplessly. "Yes, I can," I said firmly. "And I am." She tried again, standing up, tears already welling. "I never wanted anything from you. I just wanted you to be safe, to have someone." I reached for her hand, gripping it tightly. "And you gave me that," I whispered. "You were the only one who stayed, the only one who listened, the only one who made me feel like I mattered when everyone else just wanted to forget me." She shook her head. tears slipping free. "I don't deserve—" "You do," I said, fierce now. "I'm not doing this out of gratitude, Claire. I'm doing it because I choose to. Because you are family, whether you realize it or not." Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat gently. "I'll need you to sign here, Martha," he said, sliding the papers across the table. My hand trembled a little as I picked up the pen, not from weakness, but from the sheer weight of the moment. I wasn't just changing a piece of paper. I was reclaiming my life. I was deciding for the first time in a long time who was worthy of the legacy Jack and I built from nothing. I signed each page carefully, deliberately. When it was done, Whitmore packed everything away, his expression unreadable. "It's official," he said. Claire sat back down heavily, her face pale with shock. I squeezed her hand again. "It's yours now," I said softly. "All of it." The family I birthed had chosen greed over love. Claire, a stranger, had chosen loyalty without expecting a single thing in return. And that mattered. It mattered more than blood, more than tradition, more than appearances. It mattered enough for me to rewrite the end of my story, not as a victim, not as a forgotten relic, but as a woman who chose love, in whatever form it found her. The bitterness I felt for my children didn't wash away. It hardened, crystallized into something sharp and permanent. I wouldn't forget what they had done. I wouldn't forgive it either. But I would move forward without them, and I would make damn sure that, in the end, they would understand just how completely they had lost me. Because this time, it was my choice. And there was no going back. I wasn't about to let them hear it from a stranger. No, I wanted them to know it came straight from me, while I was still here, still breathing, still strong enough to watch them squirm. After the papers were finalized, I told Mr. Whitmore to call my children, arrange a meeting, bring them all into the same room. "I want them to know exactly what they lost," I said, my voice steady. "I want them to hear it while they can still look me in the eyes." He hesitated, but only for a moment. Then he nodded. The meeting was set for Saturday. The apartment buzzed with a kind of electric dread that morning. Claire sat beside me on the worn couch, her hands folded tightly, offering silent support. I wasn't scared. I was ready. For the first time in years, I would be the one holding the power. They arrived one by one. David first, looking harried and self-important in his suit. Lisa next, dragging along her husband, who carried a leather folder like a shield. And then Michael, 30 minutes late, sunglasses still perched on his head, like he was doing me a favor just by showing up. They filed into the room, fake smiles plastered on their faces, the tension thick enough to choke on. Mr. Whitmore stood quietly by the window, waiting for my signal. I didn't bother with pleasantries. "Let's get to it," I said. David cleared his throat, trying to set the tone. "We're just concerned, Mom. About your well-being." Lisa jumped in, voice syrupy sweet. "We heard you made some changes, maybe without fully understanding the implications." Michael crossed his arms, looking bored already. "Claire's been influencing you, hasn't she? We're your family. You can trust us." I almost laughed. Trust. They had sold my trust for pennies the second they put me in that hellhole. Instead, I leaned forward, my voice low and clear. "I am perfectly capable of making my own decisions. In fact, I've made a few you might find educational." Mr. Whitmore opened his briefcase and pulled out the new documents. "You have been removed from the will," I said, savoring each word. "Completely, entirely, irrevocably." They froze, disbelief and outrage twisting their faces into masks I barely recognized. Lisa found her voice first, shrill and cracking. "You can't do that! We're your children! We have a right!" "You had a responsibility," I snapped, cutting her off. "And you failed." David stepped forward, palms up like he was reasoning with a lunatic. "Mom, come on. We did what we thought was best. You weren't safe at home." I met his eyes, letting him see every ounce of the betrayal I carried. "You sold my home. You stole my name. You decided I was dead before I ever stopped breathing." Michael snorted. "She's manipulating you. She's after your money." Claire stood up then, quiet but firm. "I never asked for a dime. I was here when you weren't. That's the difference." Lisa's husband tried to intervene, talking about contesting the will, guardianship proceedings, mental competency evaluations. I smiled coldly. "I've had full psychiatric clearance, medical reports, legal validation. You'll lose, and you'll lose, publicly." The room went silent. The realization hit them like a physical blow. There was nothing they could do, No tricks, no bargaining, no redemption. They had gambled, and they lost. I stood slowly, my body aching but my spirit sharp as a knife. "You spent years carving me up like a turkey at Thanksgiving," I said. "You couldn't even wait until I was cold. Now you get nothing. No second chances, no deathbed confessions, no closure." David looked like he might cry. Lisa opened her mouth, then closed it again. Good. I wanted them to feel it. Every ounce of the pain, the abandonment, the betrayal. "You made your choices," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence. "And I've made mine." I turned to Claire, who stood quietly, tears glistening in her eyes. "This is my family now." Without another word, I pointed to the door. "Get out." They hesitated, stunned into silence, but when I didn't move, didn't flinch, they shuffled toward the exit. No hugs, no apologies, no last desperate pleas, just the sound of the door clicking shut behind them. I sank back onto the couch, feeling a bone-deep exhaustion, but also something else, freedom. I had spent so many years swallowing my pain, minimizing my hurt, pretending everything was fine. No more. They chose greed. I chose dignity. Claire sat beside me, taking my hand in hers. We didn't say anything. We didn't have to. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't holding on to memories of a family that didn't exist anymore. I was holding on to the future I chose, on my terms. A few days later, I began to feel weaker and my health started to decline. At first, I thought it was just the stress, the arguments, the betrayal, the endless legal meetings. It would wear anyone down, especially someone my age. The headaches started first, then the dizziness, nausea that came in violent waves, a bone-deep fatigue that no amount of rest could shake. Claire noticed, of course. She was always watching, always hovering with a glass of water and that same patient smile. "Here, Mrs. Reynolds, take your medication. It'll help." I trusted her. God help me, I trusted her more than I trusted anyone. So I took the pills she handed me, morning and night, without thinking twice. And every day, I got worse. It didn't make sense. The doctors at Shady Grove had said my condition was stable, that with proper care, I might even regain some of my strength. Instead, I was slipping back into that same helplessness I had fought so hard to escape. Something didn't add up. One afternoon, sitting by the window, I stared down at the little white pills Claire had placed in my hand. They looked off, different from what I remembered. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. I closed my fingers around them instead of swallowing, slipping them into the pocket of my robe when Claire turned away. That night, I didn't take them. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the familiar panic rise. But morning came, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't wake up drowning in nausea. The headache was still there, a dull throb, but my mind felt clearer, stronger. I tested it again the next day. Skipped the pills, and again, better. Not perfect, not cured, but better. A chill ran through me. I started hiding the pills each time Claire brought them. I tucked them into an old tea tin in the back of the kitchen cabinet, counting each one carefully. After a few days, I compared them to the medications I had been prescribed at Shady Grove, the ones I kept locked in a drawer, untouched since I left. There were differences, tiny, subtle differences in the color of the capsules, the markings on the tablets, differences that a trusting, tired old woman might miss, but not anymore. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the 2 sets of pills laid out in front of me. Side by side, the truth was impossible to ignore. Claire had been giving me something else, something that made me weaker, more dependent, more grateful for her help. My heart shattered in my chest. Claire, my savior, my friend, my only family, had been poisoning me. I wanted to believe there was some other explanation, some mistake, some misunderstanding, but deep down, I knew better. The realization clawed at me, leaving raw, bloody wounds where trust had once lived. I had let her in. I had given her everything. And now, I didn't know who she really was, but I intended to find out. Because if there was one thing I had learned, it was this. No one, not family, not friends, not even the ones who saved you, was above suspicion. Not when you had something they wanted. Not when survival was the only thing left to fight for. The hardest part wasn't the waiting. It wasn't the pretending. It was smiling at Claire, or Rachel, or whatever her real name was, and acting like I was still the same foolish old woman who trusted her with everything. I knew I had to be careful. If she sensed anything, if she got even the slightest hint that the game was up, she'd be gone. Just like that. So I put on my best performance. I smiled when she brought me tea. I nodded when she adjusted my pillows. I let her think I was still weak, still blind. And then, casually, I said, "You know, Claire, I've been thinking. Maybe it's time I met with Mr. Whitmore again. There are a few things I want to add to the will." Her face froze for a fraction of a second before she caught herself. "Oh, sure," she said too brightly. "I can call him for you. I'll handle it." I nodded, pretending to be grateful. But days passed, and no Mr. Whitmore. Every time I asked, Claire had a new excuse. "He's busy, Mrs. Reynolds. He said he'll call back." I left a message. "I'm sure he's just tied up." Lie after lie, wrapped in syrupy concern. I knew then. She wasn't going to let me reach him, not if she could help it, so I insisted. "I really want to finalize a few things for you, Claire," I said sweetly. "Some special instructions. I'd feel better knowing it's all taken care of." That seemed to ease her suspicion. Her greed overpowered her caution. The next morning, I called Mr. Whitmore myself, when Claire went out to run errands. My hands shook dialing the number, but I pressed through. When he picked up, I didn't waste a second. "I need you here tomorrow," I said. "Alone." He didn't argue. The next day, just after breakfast, Mr. Whitmore arrived. Claire made an excuse to go for a walk, thinking I was about to hand her the keys to my life. As soon as the door closed behind her, I turned to him. "I need to change everything," I said, my voice shaking with fury barely held in check. "And I need you to find out who she really is." Whitmore's face darkened instantly. "You suspect foul play?" he asked carefully. "I don't suspect," I said. "I know." He nodded once, decisive. "I'll start an investigation immediately. But Martha, if you think she's dangerous, you shouldn't stay alone with her." I smiled grimly. "I can handle one more day," I said, "and I want her to stay close. If she realizes I know, she'll disappear. I want her to pay for what she's done to me." Whitmore hesitated, but finally agreed. He left quickly, promising to move fast. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. Claire returned that afternoon, all smiles and concern, completely unaware of the trap closing around her. I played along, but inside, I counted the hours, the minutes, the seconds, and then, finally, the next morning, a sharp knock on the door. Mr. Whitmore stepped inside, his face grim. Claire was in the kitchen, humming, oblivious. He handed me a single sheet of paper. I read it once, twice, my hands clenched around the edges. Claire wasn't Claire at all. Her real name was Rachel Jennings, a con artist with a long, ugly history of targeting elderly people, lonely, vulnerable souls like me. She had drained bank accounts, forged documents, isolated her victims until there was no one left to save them, and I had given her everything. Tears burned my eyes, but I forced them down. Not now, not yet, because now I knew the truth, and now it was my turn to choose what came next. Mr. Whitmore leaned in close after handing me the report, his voice low and urgent. "I've already contacted the authorities. The police are on their way. Mrs. Reynolds, stay calm. They'll handle it." I nodded, clutching the paper tightly in my lap. A part of me, a small, savage part, relished the idea of seeing her face when the police walked through that door. But life, as always, had other plans. From the kitchen I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a glass shattering on the floor. Then silence. Too much silence. I turned just in time to see Rachel, not Claire, bolt through the back door, her footsteps frantic against the cracked pavement. Gone. Just like that. Whitmore cursed under his breath and rushed to the phone, informing the police of her escape. But I didn't move. I just sat there, staring at the door swinging in the cold morning breeze, feeling the betrayal settle deeper into my bones. Rachel Jennings, the woman I trusted with my life, a thief wearing the face of a savior. Whitmore came back, calmer now. "It's all right," he said. "We have everything we need. Witness testimonies, forged documents, surveillance footage from the pharmacy where she altered prescriptions. She won't get far." The case was handed off to the police, quietly. No sirens, no flashing lights, no public spectacle. Just cold, swift justice unfolding behind the scenes. I still had one more thing to do. I instructed Whitmore to remove Rachel, Claire, from the will immediately. I wasn't about to let a ghost inherit my life's work. The new paperwork was signed that same afternoon. Clear, final. And for my children, the ones who had thrown me away like yesterday's newspaper, I left something special. Not property, not money, not apologies. An envelope, a simple, unassuming envelope. Inside, a single note, handwritten in my neat, steady cursive. Don't worry about dividing what was mine. I've already taken care of it. No signatures, no explanations, just the cold truth, wrapped in finality. They wouldn't get a dime. Not because Rachel tricked me, not because of some stranger's betrayal, but because of their betrayal, because they abandoned me, because they let their greed outweigh their love, because I saw them for who they really were and decided they weren't worthy of the legacy I had built. The apartment was silent again after Whitmore left, the kind of silence that didn't ache, didn't press down on my chest. It felt clean. It felt like victory. Rachel was gone. My children were gone. And for the first time in years, I was standing in the wreckage they left behind, not broken. Weeks slipped by like leaves in the wind, slowly at first, then faster as life found its rhythm again. I lived quietly, tucked away in that modest apartment, savoring each morning like it was a prize I had fought hard to win. And then, one bright Friday afternoon, Mr. Whitmore called. His voice held a rare note of satisfaction. "Rachel Jennings has been arrested," he said, "caught trying to pull the same scheme on another woman across town." I closed my eyes, letting the words settle deep inside me. Not with bitterness, not with vengeance, but with peace. Justice had found her. Not in a courtroom packed with reporters, not in some dramatic showdown. Quietly, efficiently, completely. The way real justice should. The way I deserved. But that wasn't the only miracle. In the days that followed, something even more astonishing began to happen. I got better. At first, it was small things. I woke up without that crushing nausea. I could sit up longer, move more freely. My headaches lessened. The dizziness faded. The doctors were baffled. With the right medication, the real medication, with decent meals, real rest, and a life no longer poisoned by fear and betrayal, my condition stabilized. Stress can do more damage than we realize, the doctor said with a small, sheepish smile. But you, Mrs. Reynolds, you're tougher than most. Damn right, I thought. Within a few weeks, I was walking again. Slowly, carefully, but walking. I made my own coffee in the mornings, watered my plants, paid my bills, little victories that tasted sweeter than any grand celebration. I wasn't the frail, forgotten woman they had all left behind. I was Martha Reynolds, and I was still here, living, choosing, deciding, commanding. As for the inheritance, the fortune they once fought over like rabid dogs, it wouldn't go to children who measured my worth in dollars. It wouldn't go to a liar who wore kindness like a mask. No, it would go to causes that mattered, to shelters that housed the forgotten, to scholarships for girls like I once was, fierce, scared, desperate for a chance, to people who needed a hand to lift them, not a hand to take from them. I sat one evening by the window, watching the sun dip low over the city. The streets below buzzed with life, messy, loud, imperfect, just like me. I thought about Jack, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the hollow ache of his absence. I felt gratitude for the life we built, for the strength he taught me, for the voice he helped carve into my soul, a voice that had risen from the ashes, clear, unbreakable, still mine. I smiled to myself, the kind of smile that comes when you know, truly know, that you survived what was meant to destroy you. Not as a ghost, not as a victim, but as the woman I had always been, Martha Reynolds, alive, free, and finally, in control of my own ending. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.